I went up to room 214 to fix a leaking faucet. When she reached past me for her keycard, her sleeve fell back, and I saw it. A small crescent-shaped birthmark on her left wrist. Identical to mine, identical to the one my daughter had the night I was told she did not survive. I had believed that for 28 years. I was not sure I believed it anymore. Most mornings I sit on this porch with my coffee and watch the light come up over the Chesapeake Bay. At 62, my life looks nothing like I thought it would. I made my peace with that a long time ago, mostly. But some mornings, life decides to rewrite itself without us asking your permission. This is the story of one of those mornings. And by the time I finish telling it, I think you will understand why the most powerful thing I ever did was simply stand still and wait. I have worked at Harborview Inn for 7 years now, and I still notice the light on the water every single morning. I do not think that will ever stop. The inn sits right on the edge of the bay in Annapolis, a 3-story building made of old timber and dark brick that has been welcoming guests since before anyone currently alive was born. From the second floor, railing, where I spend most of my early mornings doing checks, you can see the sailboats rocking at their moorings and the pelicans working the shallows near the dock. There is a particular quality to that light at 6:30 in the morning. It sits flat on the water and goes almost silver before the sun gets any higher. I notice it every time. It is not a bad place to land when your life has fallen apart. And mine had fallen apart. That is the honest way to say it. For 23 years, I worked as a senior structural engineer in Washington, D.C., designing bridges and load-bearing frameworks for buildings that are still standing today. I was good at it, genuinely good. I understood how things held together under pressure, how much weight a structure could carry before the design started to fail. I did not apply that same understanding to my marriage, and by the time I finally did, it was already over. The divorce from Nora took the house, the savings, the professional network I had spent 2 decades building. In a city like D.C., where your reputation is your currency, losing the support of someone as well-connected as Nora meant losing the city itself. I packed what fit in my truck and drove east until I hit water. I was not looking for a job at a hotel. The maintenance position at Harborview came through a man I had helped with a structural assessment years before, and he remembered me when I needed remembering. I have always been grateful for that. I took the job the same week I arrived, and I have not regretted it once. My life here is small in the best sense of that word. I live in a staff room behind the main building, not much bigger than a college dorm, but I have a window that faces the garden, and I grow tomatoes on the sill from early spring through late fall. Not a lot of them, just enough. I know every pipe, every fuse box, every stuck door hinge in this building. I know which floorboard on the 3rd floor hallway squeaks at 3 in the morning and which guest is likely to be the one walking on it. The staff call me Mr. Bledsoe with a warmth that has nothing to do with my job title. And honestly, that means more to me than I would have expected it to when I was younger. That particular morning, I was up on the 2nd floor exterior railing with a reseating a bracket that had worked itself loose over the winter. Marcus, one of the younger housekeeping staff, came around the corner below me, carrying a cart that was listing badly to one side. I could see from up there that one of the wheels had cracked clean through. I came down, pulled a replacement wheel from my kit, and swapped it out while he held the cart steady. He thanked me, and I told him it was no trouble, which it wasn't. That is simply how the mornings go around here. It was while I was crouching there with the wrench that I noticed my thumb resting on the inside of my left wrist, right over the birthmark. I do it without thinking. Have done it my whole life. It is a small mark, a crescent shape about the size of a thumbnail, pale against the skin unless the light catches it at a certain angle. My mother had it too, and she told me once that her grandmother had it as well. When Lily was born, she had it. That was the first thing I looked for when they showed her to me, and there it was, the same small crescent on her tiny left wrist, perfect and clear. Lily was born too early and lived only a few hours. That is what they told me. I have carried that fact for 28 years, the way you carry something heavy in a coat pocket, always there, always pulling slightly to one side, so familiar by now that you almost stop noticing the weight. Almost. Late that afternoon, Diana at the front desk called me over to go through the room assignments for a medical conference group, checking in over the next hour. She handed me the list so I could note which rooms needed extra towel rails and which had the temperamental thermostats. I went down the names room by room, marking as I went. The last entry on the list read Room 214, Dr. Claire Harmon, Boston. I marked the box, handed the list back to Diana, and went to get my toolbox. The call came in just after 7 the next morning. A slow drip under the bathroom sink in Room 214. Nothing urgent, the kind of thing I could fix in 20 minutes with my eyes closed. I knocked twice and heard her say she would just be a moment. When the door opened, Dr. Claire Harmon was dressed for her presentation, a dark blazer over a white blouse, her hair pulled back, already composed in the way that people are who've been up and working or hours before the rest of the world starts moving. She was younger than I expected, early 30s at most. She had the focused, slightly distracted look of someone running 3 thoughts at once. I have met a lot of people in this job. You get a read on them pretty quickly. She stepped back to let me in and gestured toward the bathroom. I thanked her and moved past. I was on my way to the sink when she reached across the entryway table for her key card. She was standing just behind me and slightly to my left, and when her arm extended, the sleeve of her blazer rode back 2 or 3 inches. I saw it in the edge of my vision and stopped walking before I understood why I had stopped. A crescent-shaped birthmark on her left wrist. Small, pale, sitting in exactly the same position as mine. The same shape, the same size. The same slight curve tilting toward the thumb side of the wrist. I turned toward the bathroom and crouched down in front of the cabinet under the sink. I do not know how much time passed before I picked up my wrench. My hands were steady. I made sure of that. I tightened the fitting, checked the supply line, ran the water for 30 seconds, and checked again. When I came out, she was reviewing something on her phone near the window, already somewhere else in her mind. I told her the fitting had just worked itself loose, and that it should hold fine now. She thanked me without looking up and said she appreciated it. I picked up my toolbox and left. I stood in the hallway for a moment after the door closed. Then I walked to the service stairwell, sat down on the top step, and stayed there for about 5 minutes without moving. A housekeeper walked past and gave me a polite nod. I nodded back. I must have looked like I was just resting. The conference sessions ran all morning in the small meeting room off the main lobby. I had a thermostat to recalibrate on the ground floor, which required me to pass the glass partition twice. The second time I passed, I stopped. Claire was at the front of the room presenting something to a group of about 15 people, her posture easy and authoritative. At one point she paused, and in that pause, without any apparent awareness of doing it, she placed her right thumb against her left wrist, against the birthmark. She held it there for 2 or 3 seconds while she gathered her next thought, then let her hand fall and continued talking, same spot, same gesture. I do the same exact thing. I walked away from the partition and went back to the thermostat. Well, I want to stop here for just a moment and ask you something directly, because I think some of you will understand what I mean. Have you ever known something was true before you had a single piece of evidence to support it? Not suspected it, not hoped for it, but known it. The way you know the temperature of a room the second you walk in, before you have thought about it at all. That is where I was standing that afternoon. And I want you to know that I did not trust that feeling. I have lived long enough to know that the mind will build a bridge to wherever it most wants to go, regardless of whether the materials are sound. So I went back to my room that evening and I did what an engineer does. I looked for the load-bearing facts. I kept a small tin box in the bottom drawer of my dresser. I had not opened it in over a year. Inside, there was a creased ultrasound photograph from 28 years ago, the image grainy and faded but still clear enough to read the name on the label at the bottom. There was a tiny plastic hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns, white with black text, reading Baby Girl Bledsoe. And there was a folded piece of notepaper in my own handwriting from the night of the birth, 4 lines long. Lily, 3 pounds 2 O's. She had your eyes. She had the mark. I set the note on my knee and just sat with it for a while. Did not move. Did not do anything. Then I picked up my phone. Claire Harmon, Boston. The search took less than a minute to return a name: Richard Harmon, real estate developer, Boston. His wife was listed as Margaret Harmon, formerly Margaret Calloway. I searched Margaret Harmon in Washington, D.C., and found what I was not entirely surprised to find and was not at all prepared for. A photograph from a charity event held years ago, a long table of donors and attorneys. Margaret Harmon was in the third row. 2 seats to her left, smiling at the camera, was Nora. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Then I closed the phone and set it face down on the mattress. I told myself it was a coincidence. 2 women at the same fundraiser in a city where everyone in certain circles eventually ends up at the same fundraiser. I told myself that a birthmark was not a birth certificate, that resemblance was not evidence, that I was a 62-year-old man sitting alone in a small room constructing a story out of grief and pattern recognition. I told myself all of that, clearly and carefully, the way I used to talk through a structural calculation out loud to catch what I might have missed. It did not help. I lay down on top of the covers with the light off and listened to the water moving against the dock outside my window. The bay makes a particular sound at night, a low rhythmic pull that I have found steadying for years. That night it was not steadying. I watched the ceiling and waited for the rational part of my mind to take over, the way it always had. It did not take over. It just kept returning to the same 2 things: a crescent mark on a young woman's wrist, and a note in my own handwriting that I had folded and carried for 28 years. The second morning of the conference, I was in the main lobby repositioning an equipment cart near the side hallway when I heard her voice coming from around the corner by the house phones. She's speaking loudly, but the lobby was quiet, and the words carried clearly. She was saying, "I know you are not comfortable with it, Dad, but it is something I have always needed. I just want to know where I came from. That is all I am asking." There was a pause while she listened. Then she said, "I know you love me. That is not what this is about." I kept my hands on the cart and my eyes on what I was doing. I did not move until I heard her walk in the other direction toward the conference room. Then I set the cart against the wall, walked through the service door at the end of the hall, and went outside. I sat on the low wooden bench beside the delivery entrance and pulled out my phone. I was not searching casually anymore. I went back to the court records database I had found the night before, and this time I narrowed the search. I was looking for anything connected to the hospital where Lily was born, anything touching on obstetric records, any legal proceeding that might have been filed and quietly closed. It took me about 15 minutes to find it. A medical ethics complaint filed at the district court level and dismissed without prejudice. The filing described a dispute over incomplete and inconsistent obstetric records at the hospital. The complaint named a physician respondent. Most of the document was redacted or simply absent from the partial archive I was reading. But the attorney of record listed as representing the respondent was not redacted: Nora M. Bledsoe, SQ, Washington, D.C. I read the name twice. Then I put the phone in my shirt pocket and sat with my hands on my knees and looked at the gravel in front of my boots. So, I have spent a lot of years trying to remember that night clearly, and never quite managing it. I was not the one who was sedated. I was the one standing in the hallway. I remembered the floor, a pale green linoleum with a faint pattern that I studied for what felt like hours, because there was nothing else to look at. I remembered the fluorescent light in the ceiling that hummed at a frequency just a buzz above the threshold of irritating. I remembered that Nora had not wanted me in the delivery room. I had said it clearly, and with a firmness I attributed at the time to fear, and the particular way she had always handled fear, which was to draw a tight circle around herself and let no one inside it. I remembered Dr. Patricia Wells coming through the swinging door in pale green scrubs, her shoes squeaking once on the linoleum, stopping a few feet away from me with her hands clasped in front of her. Her expression was prepared. That was the word that came to me then and was with me for years. Her expression was already prepared before she opened her mouth. She told me the baby had not survived, that the lungs were too underdeveloped, that everything had been done that could be done. She said she was sorry, and she sounded like she meant it, or like she had practiced meaning it. They brought the bundle to me a short while later. I held it for a few minutes in a chair outside the room. Then a nurse took it gently from my arms, and I sat there alone, under the humming light, until someone came and told me Nora was resting and that I should go home and sleep. 2 days later, Nora's attorney delivered the divorce papers to my office. 3 weeks after that, she was gone from the house. I had believed for 28 years that she was running from grief, that losing the baby had broken something between us she could not face. I had even found a way to understand it, or something close to understanding. Grief makes people do things that look like abandonment, but are really just a person coming apart at the seams. I had told myself that story for almost 3 decades. I understood now that she was not running from grief. There was no grief to run from. She was running from me. And from the moment when I might eventually start asking questions, she had no intention of answering. Her name on that court document was not a coincidence. Attorneys do not appear as counsel of record defending medical ethics complaints at the exact hospital where their former husbands lost a child. That is not how coincidence works. I had spent my career calculating structural tolerances, and I knew with precision what fell with acceptable variance and what did not. This did not. I sat on that bench for a long time. A delivery truck came and went. One of the kitchen staff propped open the back door and let the sound of the breakfast service spill out into the morning air for a few minutes, then let it fall shut again. I did not move through any of it. Before you begin to dismantle anything, you must first understand every load that structure is carrying. You must know what it is holding up. What would shift if you removed a single element? You do not pull on a thread because you are impatient. You map the entire system first. I had learned that early, and I had never forgotten it. I put my right hand over the birthmark on my left wrist and held it there. Then I stood up, straightened my shirt, and went back inside to finish my shift. The next morning I fixed a sticky lock on the third-floor corridor, replaced a burned-out bulb above the pool deck, and recalibrated the ice machine in the service pantry. I moved through the building at my usual pace, spoke to the people I always spoke to, and gave nothing away. That kind of deliberate normalcy is harder than it sounds. It requires you to be fully present in each small task while keeping another part of your mind working quietly in the background, carrying weight the main frame does not show. That is exactly what I was doing. I had spent part of the previous night researching Dr. Patricia Wells. She had retired from obstetric practice some years ago and was now living in an assisted care facility in Burlington, Vermont. Not much online about her beyond a few old journal citations and a professional profile that had not been updated in years. She had practiced at the hospital where Lily was born for over 2 decades. By all visible evidence, she had been a careful and well-regarded physician. I noted the name of the facility in Vermont and moved on to the court archives. I had been working through them methodically, the way you work through a set of structural drawings. Most of what I found was noise, routine complaints, standard dismissals. I was about to close the search when a short item from a small regional legal journal loaded slowly on my screen. A notice of dismissal for a medical ethics complaint against an unnamed physician respondent. Irregularities in obstetric record-keeping at the hospital. Filed and dismissed without prejudice at the district level. The kind of item that would mean nothing to anyone who did not already know what to look for. The attorney of record representing the respondent was listed as Nora M. Bledsoe, Washington, D.C. I sat with that for a long time. A tragedy does not require an attorney. A spontaneous act of grief does not generate court filings. A woman who loses a child in a delivery room does not appear years later as legal counsel defending the physician who signed the death documentation. What I was looking at was not tragedy, it was a construction. Someone had designed it, built it, and then retained legal representation to defend it when it was challenged. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark of my room for a while, then picked up my phone and called my former divorce attorney. He was retired now and answered on the fourth ring. I asked him one question. If a child was falsely declared dead and placed with another family through fraudulent documentation, is there any remaining legal basis for action after this many years? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, particularly if you can demonstrate documentary fraud. He asked if I wanted to talk further. I told him not yet and thanked him and ended the call. I went to the small storage room behind the kitchen that I sometimes used when I needed to think. I pulled the cord on the single work light and sat down on a crate near the window. Outside, the bay was dark except for the running lights of a few boats moving slowly toward the marina. I rested my right hand over my left wrist and watched the water for a long time without thinking in words. There is a difference between assembling evidence for revenge and assembling evidence for truth. I knew which one I was doing. I was angry in the quieter way, the way that makes you very still and very careful, because you understand that the only thing that matters now is getting it right. The following morning, I found a handwritten note tucked into the top tray of my toolbox. Dr. Harmon in room 214 had reported a concern with the air conditioning. She had made one specific request. She had asked that only Mr. Bledsoe come up to handle it. I read the note once, folded it, and put it in my shirt pocket. Then I picked up my toolbox and walked to the elevator. The air conditioning in room 214 was working fine. I could hear it from the hallway before I even knocked. Claire opened the door, and we looked at each other for a moment, in the way that people do when both of them know that the stated reason for a conversation is not the real one. She stepped back to let me in without saying anything about the thermostat. I set my toolbox down just inside the door and did not open it. I reached into the front pocket of my work shirt and took out the ultrasound photograph. It was folded twice and soft at the creases from years of handling. I crossed to the small table near the window and placed it down flat between us. Then I pushed back my left sleeve and held my wrist out so she could see the birthmark clearly in the morning light. I said, I think we need to talk as two people who may share something, not as a guest and a repairman. I am not here to make any claims. I just think we both deserve to look at this honestly. Claire looked at the photograph. She looked at my wrist. Then she looked down at her own left wrist. For a long moment, her right thumb moving to the mark the way it had during her presentation, the same unconscious reach. She pulled out the chair from the table and sat down slowly, the way a person sits when their legs have decided before their mind has caught up. She did not speak right away. I did not fill the silence. There was enough in the room already without adding words to it. We talked for a little over an hour. I told her what I knew and what I suspected and where the two were still separate. I told her about Lily, about the night of the birth, about the hallway and the doctor and the bundle I had held for a few minutes before it was taken away. I told her about Nora's name on the court filing. I told her I had not come to that room to upset her life. I had come because I believed we were both owed the truth. Claire listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said she had always known she was adopted. Her parents had told her when she was a teenager. She said she had spent years trying to decide whether she needed to know more and had never quite been able to leave the question alone. She did not say anything else for a moment. She just sat with her left hand resting flat on the table, palm down, over the birthmark. I was back on the ground floor by early afternoon when the front desk called my cell. A woman had phoned asking for me by name. She had said her name was Eleanor Banks. She had said she was a retired nurse. She had found my name listed on the hotel's staff page online, had been looking at it on and off for several weeks, and had not been sleeping well. She wanted me to know that she needed to say something before it was too late, and that she was sorry it had taken her this long. I wrote the name down on the back of a work order slip, Eleanor Banks. Then I asked for her number. I called her within the hour. She answered on the second ring, with the careful voice of someone who had been waiting by the phone. She exhaled slowly and said she knew who I was. She said, with my name on it. She said she had been a nurse in the obstetric ward the night my daughter was born, that she had been present for what happened, and that she had accepted money to sign paperwork she should never have signed. She had kept a photocopy of the original records in a box at the back of her for 28 years because she could not make herself destroy them and could not make herself come forward. She was 78 years old, she said. Her memory was beginning to go in ways that frightened her, and that she was not willing to lose this particular truth before she had the chance to tell it to the right person. That evening, Claire and I sat together in the hotel's small meeting room with a laptop open on the table. Eleanor appeared on the screen in a plain chair in what looked like a sitting room, a lamp on the table beside her, her hands folded in her lap. She was a small woman with white hair and a steady gaze, and she told us everything without embellishment and without looking away. She confirmed that the infant had lived. She described the arrangement, the payment, the false documentation, the photocopy she had hidden and kept. She said she did not know all the details of how it had been organized above her level, only her own part in it and what she had witnessed directly. She said, I have asked myself every year since then whether I did the right thing by staying quiet, and every year the answer has been the same. When she finished, the three of us sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the bay was going gray in the early evening light. Claire had her left hand on the table in front of her, palm down exactly as she had sat that morning. She had not moved it the entire time Eleanor was speaking. Claire and I met with an attorney in Annapolis 3 days later. We brought what we had. Eleanor's photocopy, the court filing with Nora's name, the results of a preliminary records request I had submitted to the hospital. The attorney reviewed everything without rushing and told us what the next steps looked like. There was no dramatic moment in that office, no declaration, just a yellow legal pad and a list of procedural actions, each one quiet and specific and pointed in the right direction. That is how justice actually moves, in my experience. Not in one large gesture, but in a sequence of small, deliberate ones. Richard Harmon was contacted through his own attorney within the following week. His response came back quickly and without resistance. He had not known. Richard had believed the adoption to be a private arrangement, unconventional but legal, handled through channels that someone he trusted had told him were sound. He had not asked enough questions, and I think he knew that, but his ignorance of the fraud itself was genuine. A few days later, Claire took a call from him directly. I was not in the room. She told me afterward that he had asked her one thing before the call ended. He had asked, in a voice she described as very quiet and not entirely steady, whether she would still allow him to be her father. She said he had used those words exactly, whether she would still allow it, as if the permission were hers to give, and he understood that now. She told me she had not answered him. She had also not ended the call. I thought about that for a long time. The particular kind of courage it takes to leave a door neither open nor closed, to refuse to decide in either direction when you are not yet ready. That is its own kind of strength. Not everybody sees it that way, but I do. When Nora was formally confronted through the legal process, she did not deny what she had done. My attorney relayed her statement to me in summary, which was the only form I wanted it in. She had said she knew, even at the time, that I would have been the better parent. She had said that knowing it had frightened her in a way she had not been prepared for. She said the fear had arrived before any clear thinking could, and the decision had followed the fear before she had understood what she was actually deciding. I sat with that for a while. After my attorney finished speaking, I had spent many years constructing an explanation for what Nora had done, and the explanation I had built was the simplest one available: that she had not wanted me, had not wanted a child, and had arranged her exit. That explanation had clean lines. What my attorney described was messier. It was a woman who had looked at the man she was married to, seen something in him she recognized as better than herself, and responded to that recognition with an act of profound and irreversible harm. I did not find that easier to hold than the simpler version. In some ways it was harder. But it was true, and I had committed myself to following the truth wherever it went, including the places that did not offer any relief. The professional consequences came through their respective channels over the following months. Nora's law license was suspended pending a conduct review her attorney indicated she would not contest. The medical board in Vermont opened an inquiry into Dr. Patricia Wells. Richard Harmon signed a full cooperation agreement and provided everything that was asked of him without delay. None of it felt like winning. I want to be honest about that. The structures built to contain a lie were coming apart the way old structures do when the underlying dishonesty finally becomes visible slowly, piece by piece, without drama. It was appropriate. It was necessary. And it was exhausting in a way that surprised me, because I had thought that watching it happen would feel like something being returned to me. What it actually felt like was the lifting of a weight I had stopped noticing I was carrying. That evening I walked out to the dock behind the inn after my shift ended. The water was flat and dark, and the lights from the marina on the far side of the bay made small broken lines across the surface. I sat at the end of the dock on the worn wooden planks and put my right hand over the birthmark on my left wrist. I had touched that mark 10,000 times as a symbol of what I had lost. I held it that evening and understood that the loss itself had been a construction, built by other people's choices, and that it had never been the whole truth. After a while, I stood up, put my hands in my pockets, and walked back inside. 6 months passed the way quiet months do, not quickly and not slowly, but with the particular steadiness of a life that has stopped bracing for impact. I still worked at Harborview Inn. Still did my rounds in the early morning, still knew which door needed a half-turn of adjustment when the humidity came in off the bay, still nodded to the kitchen staff at 6:30 when they were loading the first deliveries of the day. My life at the inn had not changed in any visible way, but something in the quality of it had shifted, the way a room changes when you move a piece of furniture that has been blocking the light for so long you forgot the window was there. The storage shed behind the kitchen had sat empty for years before I asked the management about it. They said yes without much deliberation. I spent 3 weekends clearing it out and setting it up with a workbench, a good vise, and enough basic tools to do honest work. The following Saturday morning, 2 teenagers from the neighborhood showed up, because Marcus from housekeeping had mentioned it to his younger brother. Within a month, there were 7 of them, showing up reliably at 8 in the morning, learning to measure twice and cut once, and pay attention to the grain of the wood. I called them the 7, which they found either funny or flattering, depending on the day. They were good company. They did not ask much of me beyond instruction and patience, which I had plenty of. In return, they reminded me what it looked like to make something from nothing, to hold a finished piece in your hands and know that it did not exist before you decided it would. There is something in that I had forgotten about for a while. Claire came to Annapolis once a month. Sometimes she had only an afternoon and we would walk the waterfront and stop for coffee. Sometimes she stayed overnight, and we would sit in the small garden behind the inn in the evening with no particular agenda. We were learning each other carefully, the way you learn a new material in the shop, testing for the places where it holds and the places where it needs more time, She told me about her work, about the long surgeries and the decisions that had to be made in seconds, and the particular exhaustion of caring about outcomes that were not entirely in your control. I listened and did not offer much in return because she did not need advice. She needed someone to sit with her while she said things out loud. I understood that. I had needed the same thing for most of my life and had rarely had it. One evening she came in from the kitchen with 2 glasses of water and set one down in front of me and said, "Your tomatoes are doing better than mine ever have, and I want to know your method." It was such an ordinary thing to say that it caught me off guard, and I told her about the drainage and the morning light and the specific amount of neglect that tomatoes actually prefer. She listened seriously and took a photograph of the pots on the windowsill with her phone. That was all. But I thought about it afterward, that small domestic moment, and understood that it was exactly the shape of what we were building. On her 4th visit, she arrived with a small cardboard box tucked under her arm, the kind a jeweler uses. She set it on the table between us and did not make any ceremony of it. She said she had not known what to bring, and that she had gone back and forth about it for weeks, and that in the end she had decided that the only thing that made sense was something connected to the one thing we had both carried before we knew the other existed. Inside the box was a bracelet made of pale wood, smooth and simply finished, with a small crescent shape carved into the outer face. Not elaborate, not expensive. It was the kind of thing made by someone who understood that the meaning was already there and did not need decoration. I picked it up and turned it over once in my hands. Then I slid it onto my left wrist and positioned it so the carved crescent sat directly over my birthmark. I have touched that mark 10,000 times over 28 years, always as a private acknowledgement of something absent. Sitting there with the bracelet resting over it, I noticed the gesture had changed. The mark was still there beneath the wood, unchanged and unchangeable, but it no longer felt like the location of a loss. It felt like the place where something had finally been found. Claire was looking out the window. She did not say anything, and I did not need her to. I told the 7 about it one Saturday morning, without names and without the specific details, just the shape of the thing. I told them that the most useful thing I had done through the whole of it was almost nothing, that I had waited and watched and let the truth come to me rather than charging after it in a way that would have made me loud and easy to dismiss. I told them that a boundary is not a wall you build to keep people out. A boundary is the space you hold around yourself, so that you can think clearly when everything else is pressing in. One of them, a quiet kid named Darius, who's rarely said much, looked up from the piece he was sanding and said, "So you just waited?" I said, "Yes, mostly." He nodded slowly and went back to the sanding. I think that landed the way things do when they are simple and true. I'm on it. That evening, I was on the porch with my coffee when the light over the bay went from white to gold, the way it does in the last half hour before the sun finishes its work. I could hear the small radio I keep on the kitchen windowsill playing something low from inside. Claire had turned it on earlier and left it running. I could not make out the song from where I sat, only the fact of it, a sound that meant someone else was nearby. I did not go inside. I did not need to do anything at all. I just sat with the coffee going warm in my hands and watched the light move across the water and understood that this, precisely this, was what I had been carrying the weight toward all along, not a conclusion, not a reward, just a porch and an evening and the quiet sound of not being alone. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way through. If you have ever chosen patience over reaction and found that it changed something, I would like to hear about it in the comments below. The characters and events here are fictional, shaped to carry something true.